I think in some way both sides can agree that the current system with the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, is not the system we may want to keep forward. Seeing as the college Republicans have the floor right now, what would you really what do you see as the direction for healthcare going forward?
Yeah, so the way I see it, the biggest problem in healthcare right now is really people not understanding what their care is going to be, whether it's because you're underinsured or because you don't have insurance whatsoever. I think really getting the information out there so that there is like transparency in your services and how much you're going to pay for it, so that you're not going into something thinking, oh, this is going to be covered, and then coming out $100,000 in debt. I would say those are the biggest problems with the healthcare system right now. Obviously there is other problems such as cost, but we can get more into that in later questions, I feel like. But yeah, I think the biggest problem right now is really just the lack of transparency and really understanding what you need to understand going into getting healthcare.
Perhaps care to state your position?
Yeah, so I wouldn't disagree with that transparency is a huge issue, but kind of what we're advocating for is a Medicare for All system, which is basically single payer where the government basically provides healthcare for everybody and it's funded with tax dollars. And there's a lot of transparency with that. Everything's covered, cost zero at the point of purchase. And so that's what we're proposing.
Democrats, I have a question for you. Obviously, that form of healthcare with the government kind of backing it is going to be a little more expensive, so how would you propose the government kind of funds that initiative? We've seen some of that in the Democratic primaries right now, but the numbers and economics of it are a little shaky to say the least. So, do you want to elaborate?
Well, first it's important to note that we already spend far more on healthcare than countries with socialized medicine already spend. The median healthcare cost for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which is essentially the United States, Canada, large parts of Europe, and I believe Australia. The median healthcare cost for members of that organization is $4,033 US per capita. In the United States, it's nearly $10,000, $9,892 per capita. This is an increase of 245% per capita relative to the rest of the organization. So right off the bat, we can cut costs. Currently, one of the large contributors to healthcare costs is administration. One of the problems there is under federal payments, about 2% of costs are administration. Under an average hospital, it's nearly a sixth. So for starters, we can cut administrative costs. That cuts our costs down automatically. Beyond that, there are, of course, going to be more expensive for the federal government, and in that there are going to be tax increases, but the goal is to tax the wealthiest in order to pay for those who really need it. The main options through this are re-implementing the estate tax, reintroducing higher marginal tax budget brackets, such as those seen under Eisenhower, Nixon, Kennedy, Johnson, etc. In addition to that, Senator Elizabeth Warren has proposed a wealth tax, and broadly speaking, we are in favor of that. I think personally the details of it need a little more hammering out, but broadly speaking, taxing the wealthy in order to provide health care for the poor is the strategy.
Republicans?
Yeah. You gotta go first,
You go.
All right, so first off, there's a lot to unpack there. For starting, you started by talking about how we could really cut costs. I do think we could definitely cut a lot of administrative costs. However, one of the largest problems with cutting cost of things such as pharmaceuticals and overall drugs in America is that currently we are heavily subsidizing it for the rest of the world. For instance, drug companies in Sweden, for instance, there's one there that just came out with a blood pressure lowering drug that wanted to get patented in India, found out that they couldn't, we're in a 15-year battle, and now will make no money on it in India. The reason they produced it is so that they can sell it in the US. If you take away the incentive for creating these drugs, they're not going to get created. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some uptick in governmental programs that would also do research, but these private industries that are really driving innovation right now are not going to continue to do so if there's no profit incentive for them. Shoot, there was something else that you said that I don't remember now.
Can I address what you just said really fast?
Yeah, absolutely.
So a big thing that like Republicans and conservatives really like to say is that if we switch things to like the public sector, there's not going to be any innovation. But I feel like even you guys would acknowledge that that's not really correct. Some of the best innovation that we've ever seen has come from the military. And what that shows is that if a government program is well funded, there's a lot of innovation coming from that. Wi-Fi, GPS, that's all come from the military. And then things such as NASA, when well funded, do create innovation. So it's not really a matter of whether or not the public sector or private sector is better at innovation. It's just a matter of where the money is.
Can I
Yeah, go right
for
ahead.
that just real quick? So I know that because I'm an RTC and I have military experience. So actually that money was given to private companies and those companies sort of innovated. Just sort of correction on that. But I see your point. What you're saying right there, yeah. But just go ahead, yeah.
In addition, I'd say military isn't the best example because there's some inherent competition there. You are trying to stay ahead of the other nations, obviously. And then if you're gonna use NASA as an example, I'd say look at SpaceX. They're doing way more than NASA has done, way faster with the lower budget. So,
Well, to be fair, we heavily cut our spending towards NASA, and then there is inherent competition when you do have the military, but like, if the competition is like, saving American lives, I mean, right now we have 45,000 deaths a year due to people having lack of healthcare. I feel like that should be the incentive of the competition to save our people. That's the inherent competition there.
You guys have a rebuttal?
Can I ask a
Wow.
question? It's sort of like it's on healthcare.
No, go
Yeah, it was just really just an earlier point, and you guys went a different direction with it. But so you guys are talking about paying it. So I was just wondering what your proposal would be. I know one thing coming from a big family is that people don't want to see taxes go up a lot, and a lot of I follow a lot of the stock market, CNBC or CNBC, and a lot of those CNN business, and a lot of these economists are afraid that this uptick in taxes is going to sort of cause a big sort of crash in business and everything in the United States. So what is your sort of proposal, whether it be like dipping into certain parts of the budget right now, federal budget, to sort of pay for this socialized medicine or healthcare?
I wasn't expecting to bring it up, but well, you have. For starters, we spend entirely too much on the military and ROTC. I'm sure you disagree with me in some respect. But we do spend per capita far more than our allies, gross sum far more than our allies. We could cut our budget in half, our military budget in half on discretionary spending, and we would still be several $1 million ahead of the next biggest spender, and we would be more in line with our budget. We would suffer very little in terms of our actual, oh boy.
sorry, quick clarifying point.
Yes.
You said discretionary spending. Did you mean military spending? Because there's
Military comes
discretionary
from the
spending.
I mean specifically our discretionary military spending.
Okay.
Because we can't really change the other stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
By definition.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah, that was realistically that was my point. We spend our discretionary military budget is essentially out of control at this point. If we were to cut it substantially, we would be able to put that money towards healthcare, and we would still be able to properly defend ourselves. We would still be in line with most of the rest of the world and still the global leader in terms of lump sum spending.
Can I please ask a question as an audience member?
Dude, why not?
So like, I've speech and debate for 4 years, and every time anything came up with funding something, the instantaneous thing to say was cut military spending.
Yes.
So where would you specifically cut it in the military spending? And would you also please recognize that the U.S. also does provide a lot of military support to our allies who do not fund their militaries as much?
No. There you go.
By all means.
No, I mean, so you're not wrong. Just cutting the military is not the only way to fund Medicare for all. But even if you brought up tax increase, I feel like a big part of that is the framing. If we frame it to people that while your taxes may go up slightly, you're paying far less in premiums and deductibles. So overall, for households with the Medicare for all system, cost for individual household goes way down. And so while taxes might go up slightly, you're getting more, you're paying less. I feel like overall it is a positive. And you brought up the stock market slightly. I'm not entirely sure how that's connected to health care, you brought up like a potential crash.
Oh, I was talking about just like businesses in general, yeah. I was talking, referencing like sort of private healthcare and all that. And
Yeah.
I guess another follow-up is like, what would like, a lot of people have private health insurance that they, is generally for the most part very good. So what would you do about that point? Because right now it's about 66% of Americans have private and 30% have government. So what would you do for people? Would you force people? Would this be an option? What would be your guys' stance on this?
Yeah, so it's kind of a weird thing because like right now we've kind of given people this illusion like, oh, you want to be able to choose what like healthcare provider you go with, but like we don't do that same thing with like the fire department. You don't like choose which fire department do you want to come and save you if there's a fire. You just want the fire department to come. You don't choose what police you want to come. You just have the police come. And so it should be the same thing with healthcare. We shouldn't be like choosing like, oh, do I want my work to pay for my healthcare? Do I want to like pay it out of pocket? Do I want the government? It should just be included because we do live in a civilized society, and some things should be a public good. It should be paid for by the government, and healthcare is one of them.
Republicans, you guys get a rebuttal, then we're going to transition to
Alright, so talking about the funding, kind of back to funding here, just because you clarified that you do want it to be specifically single payer. The estimates on single payer cost are, I think Bernie Sanders says it's gonna cost like 17 million, I think, or 17 trillion, sorry, 17, if it was 17 million, all for it.
That's a weekend.
17 trillion, I think Elizabeth Warren's were more like 23, 24, and then outside estimates were more like 30. So over 10 years, that's roughly 1.7 to $3 trillion a year. And you're talking about cutting military budget to do it. That's military budget's roughly
To help, not to do it.
Okay.
Fly.
So, but anyway, that'd be roughly 600 billion a year. I mean, it's closer to 700 billion now. But if you cut half of that, that's only less than a third of the lowest estimate. Less than a quarter of the lowest estimate. And are you saying that the rest would be made up with a wealth tax and higher taxes on just the wealthy, or?
Something to keep in mind is currently we pay 3.2 trillion a year for healthcare. So what the single payer system cost would be significantly less than that. And so it's also important to keep in mind that every single other like developed nation has some form of single payer system, and the United States is the wealthiest country in the world. So I find it pretty unrealistic that we wouldn't be able to pay for a single payer system. That would somehow like bankrupt our entire economy when every other country does it, and like we make more than every other country and we pay more than every other country, so why can't we insure everybody?